I'm Marco Zarate. I'm the owner of Solution Factor. It's a small Austin development consultancy. And so what I'm going to talk about a little bit about tonight is just freelancing, why it's not as free as its name implies, and really uncover a lot of the challenges and costs behind pursuing a freelance career. So why talk on freelancing? So this is a little off the beaten path for a technical group. So to be upfront, this isn't going to be a technical talk. It's going to be solely about freelancing and trying to make a decision on whether it's a viable career option for some of you guys. Despite that, it's still very applicable to developers. It's actually a pretty popular topic amongst developers. So most developers I know at some point or another freelance or do freelance full-time or do it part-time while working in a full-time position. I don't know if that's taboo to their bosses, but it is what it is. And so you find developers are often doing some sort of projects on the side and pursuing freelance to some extent. And it's also something that I really enjoy. Freelancing is something I'm very passionate about. I've gone back and forth a little bit between how much I love freelance versus being in a full-time job. But now that over the years, having gotten more serious about my business and how I handle it, I'm certainly a lot more passionate about freelancing than I am being in a full-time position. So hopefully some of this talk will uncover, some of my experiences, why I'm passionate about the stuff that I am, and help you guys make a decision on whether freelancing is for you or not. So a little bit about who I am. I've got 12 years of experience in the industry. 5 years of that has been as a full-time freelancer consultant. On the technical sense, I'm certainly a passionate LAMP and JavaScript developer, and just more generally passionate about the modern web. I think now more than ever is a really great time to be a web developer with the way browsers are evolving and the competition has been infused there again. So browsers are really becoming a viable platform and really giving us the kind of features we need to deliver really great apps. So it's a really great time to be a web developer. And like I said earlier, I'm the owner of Solution Factor. I'm also the owner of Freelance Factor. It's a online freelance community. It's a forum community, so if during this talk you have questions or there's something that maybe we don't get to, feel more than free to visit freelancefactor.net. There's a link at the end of the talk. Go on there, browse around, maybe register, post if you have any questions or whatnot. But if you're interested in getting involved with more freelancers and being involved in an online community, that's certainly an option. I'm also the creator of Time Panel. It's a fast time tracking and invoicing solution that I created. I've always been passionate about building custom apps and products, so that's part of why I created Time Panel, but I also use it for my own business, so I'm kind of solving my own problem there. So this is the context I bring to the talk. I've worked in the industry both as full-time and as a consultant, and I also own a site and have built products that are targeted at the freelance community. I'm also very humble in saying that I'm not an expert in any of this stuff. Maybe that's not what you want to hear, but I'm not here to claim expertise. In fact, my goal is quite the opposite. I'm going to tell you a lot of the mistakes I made as a freelancer, a lot of the struggles that I went through, to hopefully uncover what it's really like to be a freelancer and the challenges behind that. So my goals are pretty simple here. I'm just going to share a lot of my mistakes and losses. Share just a tiny bit of my wins to let you guys know kind of what works and what doesn't. And also to help maybe any existing freelancers in here improve their business, and also help anyone decide whether freelancing again is a good choice for them to pursue. So just maybe a show of hands, how many people here freelance full-time? And how many people freelance only part-time? How many people do not freelance at all but are considering it? Cool, man. All right, so I just wanted to know kind of what we're dealing with here. So because most of us freelance, a lot of this talk is intended to, it is targeted at people that are kind of aspiring freelancers and want to get into it. So the first part of this talk is going to focus a little bit on that. So starting with the hard truths, what I found out from my own experience and being involved online in communities, and talking with a lot of other freelancers face-to-face and offline, maybe through email. I'll just kind of give it to you real hard and blunt like this. Freelancing is harder than a 9-to-5 job in every single way. When you're working a full-time job, you show up during a certain time period, you get paid, or you show up, you do your job, you get paid, etc. With freelancing, you show up, maybe to meet a client, and there's no guarantee you're going to get paid. There's no guarantee you're even going to get the work. And even once you do get the work, there's a slew of problems that can prevent that from even being an enjoyable experience. So there's a lot more to freelancing than there is to being in a full-time job. One of the most important pieces to realize is that skill in your craft alone is not sufficient to be a successful freelancer. So being, if you're in a full-time job, you can show up and be a really great coder, a really great developer, and you can pursue along that path pretty well. But when you freelance, you're not just a developer. You also have to be a great marketer. You have to be a great seller. You have to be great at customer support. You have to be great at so many things. And so that's why skill in your, being a developer and having technical skill is only just a subset of what it takes to be a successful freelancer. And marketing and selling is probably the most important skill. And unfortunately, it's also the most underrated. So probably the biggest problem I hear about from freelancers, especially in year one, is how do I find clients, how do I find work, et cetera, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And successful freelancing really, I'll argue that it takes years. It's not something you're going to come across in days or even weeks or months. You may find a sustainable path pretty soon, but you're always going to be tweaking your business, you're going to be tweaking the decisions you make, you're going to be tweaking how you handle projects. And you find that through that tweaking process, it's really going to take time and refining, and you're going to find that it's going to be years until you really find a good rhythm that you operate on. So, and some more hard truths here. Speaking with, again, a lot of freelancers, in year one, a lot of freelancers find out that they had to work twice as hard than they expected to, while also earning half as much than they expected to. They've experienced problems like clients that didn't pay. They've also spent time coding when they should have been selling, spent time selling when they should have been coding. And they also seriously considered going back to a full-time job, probably multiple times. And all of these are true in my case. So it's a lot of bad stuff. So given all that, why in the world would anyone choose to pursue freelancing? You always hear about the benefits of freelancing, such as increased flexibility, the potential to make more money, being able to pursue a more diverse field of projects, and even a better quality of life. But given all the truths that we've kind of surfaced just now, how realistic are those? A lot of freelancers don't enjoy a lot of these benefits while others do. So it's very conditional, and it has a lot to do with the type of person you are and how you weigh the decision and how you prepare for it. So we'll look at some of those, flexibility, et cetera, and we'll kind of break it down in a fact versus myth format. So when it comes to flexibility, you certainly have more ownership over your own schedule. Clients really don't care for you to be working from this time to this time. There's some expectation around you being around during normal business hours to reply to email, phone call, that kind of thing. But they're not going to say be here at this time. It's more along their expectations are more along the lines of you just being able to deliver the solution and just get it done. So you don't have anyone looking over your shoulder all the time. But that can be a bit of a problem, the amount of freedom you're given. So you have to kind of ask yourself what type of person you are and how responsible are you when it comes to having total freedom. So if you're given total freedom of your day-to-day, how well would you manage that? Because that determines a lot of the success that you'll find in freelancing. So when we look at more income, the potential to make more income, this is absolutely true. There's absolutely potential to make more income in freelancing. And a small personal win, in my experience, is my first year one for me, I made $14K more as a freelancer than I did in my previous salary job. And I was making a pretty good salary. The only catch to that is I absolutely had to work my ass off. I wasn't taking it easy by any means. I was working some pretty insane hours. I was trying to sell as much as I could, at the same time code as much as I could, et cetera, et cetera. So, so there's absolutely the potential to make more money, but every bit of money you make is going to have to be supported by an extreme amount of work that you put into it. And just a couple facts, little tidbits here, especially for newbies or anyone aspiring to be a freelancer that are coming from the full-time side of things. When it comes to hourly rate, you really have to consider that as a consultant, you're not always going to bill 40 hours a week. A lot of the consultants I know and freelancers, even the successful ones, are only billing a fraction of that every week. And there's considerable downtime throughout the year as they transition from project to project, or contract to contract, et cetera. So those are things you really need to consider when you hear some sort of hearsay about earning more income as a consultant. If you pursue freelancing, understand that there's a lot behind that. There's a lot of work behind the money that's made, and also, you know, just make sure you consider how much you're going to be able to bill throughout the year. So with that being said, we'll talk a little bit about what it takes to make the jump, how you get started, and some of the business topics. So some considerations to make before you make the jump is industry experience. And I'll argue that this is one of the more important ones, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but industry experience, at least in my case, has absolutely helped me succeed as a freelancer. And I know it's been the case with other freelancers as well. And again, we'll get into detail about that in a little bit. Also, make sure you have some kind of financial cushion. A lot of people recommend 6 months worth of savings. I absolutely did not have that. I had some months worth of savings, not 6. Luckily, it still worked out for me in year 1, and I was okay. But there have been times, especially in year 2 or year 3, when things got slower, that I wish I had saved a little bit more and had much more of a financial cushion. So while I didn't hold true to that in my case, I will certainly agree with the suggestion. Another consideration is that you can start freelancing gradually. You don't have to make an abrupt change from being a full-time employee to all of a sudden jumping in and being a full-time consultant. There's some middle ground there. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. That's a little bit more secure in that it lets you experience with the risk and the freedom of being a freelancer, but also allows you to keep the security of full-time income. And also realize that freelancing is a long-term commitment. Like I said before, it takes years to really find a really good stride as a freelancer. There's probably successful folks that have been able to reach a good stride before then, but for me, it took a lot of refining, a lot of tuning. So it's certainly a long-term commitment. If you're thinking you can jump into freelancing and see returns within weeks or months, that may be true at a small scale, but over the long term, you need to bank on being able to tweak the way you operate, the decisions you make, how you manage projects, etc. And if you're entrepreneurial, that may help. Just because if you have that mindset of getting out there and doing your own thing, it certainly helps keep you motivated, knowing that as a freelancer, you're building your own business, you're building your own client relationships, etc. That as opposed to being strapped to somebody else's chair for 40 hours a week, building their business. You know, while not all of these are required in their ideal form, I have seen a pattern of these emerging amongst successful freelancers that I know. So these are really important considerations to make before going over to becoming a freelancer. So again, we'll look at industry experience, and my thoughts on why it's important is that there's too much to be learned that's either too costly or not obtainable if you try to learn everything on your own without industry experience. Being able to pick up on a lot of important lessons like full end-to-end delivery software on someone else's dollar, they will, for example, being in a full-time job, they will invest in making you into a great developer that can provide value to their company. Whereas as a freelancer, not only would you have to do that, but you have to hustle to find your own work, please your own clients, etc. And you'll make a lot of the same mistakes doing that as you would being in a full-time job with them training you and paying you. So it's best to learn a lot of the lessons that apply to freelancing on someone else's dollar, being in a full-time position. Also interfacing with clients and project lifecycle management, those are also things that most developers typically learn being in a full-time job. And a real important factor too, probably one of the most important factors on why I just went freelance, is that discovering work that you're really passionate about is very important. And I found that being in a full-time job helped with that in an incredible way. So the first company I worked for, RD3 Technologies, I was able to develop web apps and Windows applications. Whereas in another company I worked for, we basically maintained a website, typical CRUD applications, and that sort of thing. And just spending the years that I did in full-time positions and having that diverse experience really helped me realize that I'm a lot more passionate about developing custom apps, products, games, that kind of thing. And that's translated into my business now, because I'm now turning away a lot of the work that I used to accept before, typical website stuff, WordPress, Drupal. And I don't have anything against WordPress or Drupal, that kind of thing. All I'm saying is that there's certain kinds of work out there that don't motivate me. And my full-time experience helped me realize the work that does motivate me, and that's really the work that I focus on now as a freelancer, and that's a big reason why I think I'm as happy as I am being self-employed. So again, I mentioned before that you can start gradually, and so you certainly don't want to jump in head first. At least I would advise against it. There's things you can do while you still have a full-time job that will allow you to start building your business and start building a client list, your portfolio, etc., while you're still working full-time. So I'll kind of just lay out how I did it. I certainly took the gradual approach. So earlier I said I've been freelancing full-time for 5 years, but I was freelancing part-time for 2.5 years before that when I was working for companies. And during those 2.5 years, I was able to start building my client list, building portfolios, getting used to kind of what it was like to be a freelancer while still having the security of a full-time paycheck. And so over those 2.5 years, when I finally made the jump, by that time, I already had 5 clients in my portfolio, 3 of which were regular. I had up to a year of enjoyable work that really motivated me, already signed on in contracts that I could fall on. I already had my business website up and running, an accountant, which is a huge asset. My company was already registered as an LLC, and I had already formed separate bank accounts. And so these may seem small, but the big picture here is that year 1 as a freelancer is absolutely going to be your hardest year. So anything you can do before that point to help form your business is going to be a huge win, in that you won't have to trade billable time in year 1 to do activities like this if you can still do them while you're in a full-time position. So in my case, I already had this stuff knocked out. So when I started full-time freelancing, I literally just hit the ground running, showed up, started on site with clients, and started working on our payable contract and delivering value immediately. So we'll also talk a little bit about finding work. This is primarily going to be about clients and really understanding them. Obviously, finding work is important, and I find that a lot of freelancers either lose out on bids or have trouble finding work simply because they don't understand clients and what it is that they need. So before we get too deep into that, I will offer some data here on where my work came from. So I have here, so for example, we look at year 1, and you can see here that new clients and marketing made up about 1/5 of my business in year 1. And I had an ex-employer that I was able to lean on. So one good bit about being, again, going from a full-time job into freelancing is you have contacts and resources when you're a full-time employee that you can lean back on. And so in year 1, I was able to hook back up with my ex-employer and get some contract work from them, and that made up to 40% of my income that year. And repeat clients made a considerable bit too. So again, I was freelancing part-time for a good bit. And then when I finally went full-time, those clients were still clients, and they made up most of my income during year 1. And then forums and blog posts and online activity, I didn't make anything off that in year 1, unfortunately. But we fast forward to year 4, and we can see how the numbers change. So I still make some of my income off new clients that I get through marketing or networking. But we see that the income I made from my ex-employer has dropped almost to 0. And repeat clients, on the other hand, has skyrocketed. So that's really where I'm making most of my money now, is off of repeat clients.
Is that because the amount of money you're making from your employer has gone down, or has everything else gone up?
Both. So I'm certainly getting less money from my ex-employer because I'm working less hours for him, but I'm also dedicating more, trying to focus on nailing more billable hours per week, so increasing my capacity there. So it has a lot to do with both. So then, and we also see that forums and blog posts, which is a little bit of a descriptor, I really mean getting involved in online activity, it's made up almost 10% of my income in year 4. And what I mean by forums and blog posts is that I get online and I contribute to communities, I get involved, I help people out, that kind of thing. And I also started maintaining my own blog and writing to it. And when I went back to look at my income for year 4, you know, I had totally forgot that some of that income is directly attached to blog posts that I've made. For example, I was contacted 2 times in year 4 to do some database tuning or to help troubleshoot this database locking issue. And the clients reported that they got in touch with me due to finding my blog post that talked about MySQL and talked about locking, or talked about indexing, or talked about how to tune certain queries. So they read that stuff and they gain confidence that you're the person that has the value that they're looking for or the solution they're looking for, and they follow through. And things like that actually help with tipping this, you know, kind of tipping the spear the other way to allow them to go from just reading your blog and being on your site to actually engaging you for an opportunity. And so more on clients, what I've found over the years is I've really had to come to understand 2 types of clients. The first type are the technical type, you know, other developers, DBAs, designers, that kind of thing, those kind of folks. And then there's non-technical types, and that's most everyone else, especially on the business side. And I certainly don't mean that in the pejorative sense. All I'm trying to say here is that it's how you deal with one is certainly different than how you have to deal with the other. And your success on being able to sell to both types of those clients absolutely depends on realizing that. So we'll look at technical clients first, and given the context of the talk and the group here, we can certainly understand some of these points. So when I've worked with technical clients, I've always found that they're very easy to work with from a technical standpoint, obviously because they understand the technology as do you. They usually have some sort of experience with project management and just having realistic expectations throughout the project lifecycle of what can be done in a given amount of time for a certain dollar amount, etc. They also tend to value your technical expertise. And this is to say that I can pull out my resume and hand it to a technical client, a potential technical client. They can look at that and they understand the jargon, they understand the acronyms, they understand all the technical stuff in there. They'll look at it and say, okay, this guy may be worth interviewing, and it turns into an interview, and then the interview turns into a paying gig. So they understand the technology, and because they understand it, they value the experience you have with it. And for those reasons, technical clients have always been a really great source of work for me, especially early on when I started. So my ex-employer, for example, you know, they were a technical client, but not only because I had worked for them before, the relationship there was already established, the trust was established, etc. They already had very good, you know, pretty thorough ways of managing projects. They had realistic expectations about what could be done. They valued me as an employee or as a contractor and freelancer because they knew what kind of technical expertise I had. And one important point to realize with technical type of clients, which may seem obvious to you, but we'll tie it to a bigger point here in a second, is that you can absolutely talk tech with technical clients. Obviously, they understand it, right? So you can talk about technical jargon, and they'll understand what you're talking about. And on the other side of the coin, we have non-technical clients, and these are clients that don't understand technology at all. They can't relate as much to your technical expertise, so in a way, they don't value it. Not negatively, it's just simply because they don't understand the technology. They don't understand what is of value and what isn't. So, for example, I couldn't give one of my non-technical clients my resume and expect them to get the same value out of that as a technical client would. And for the most part, non-technical clients really only care about the value you provide. They're not going to care about things like using this ORM versus this ORM, this framework versus that framework, NoSQL versus SQL. They don't care about that stuff. And that reaches the next point in that you can't talk tech with technical clients, but with non-technical clients, or at least you shouldn't. And that becomes a bigger point, being able to talk about tech with technical clients and not talk about tech with non-technical clients, because it forces this, or you wind up in this common focus mismatch where we have, this is just a fun drawing. You have a consultant bottom left, and he's always focused on the tech and the gadgetry, and that's where his passion is. And then you have a business client up top left that's their sole focus is on their business, and that's what they're focused on. And starting that way, given that, you're starting out focused on completely different things, and you have to learn how to tie that gap, how to bridge that gap if you expect to land clients and be able to provide value to the business. So really where your focus should be is on their business. You have to understand their business, you have to understand their problems, understand where their pain points are, and that's where the value delivery starts, and that's how you're able to sell on clients. So, and that, by the way, is mostly under the context of non-technical clients. You really have to lose the tech for a while and lose your technical context, or leave it behind for a second, and just when you focus with clients, only concentrate on their business and kind of meet them on their ground, so to speak, so that you can understand what their problems are and what their pain points are. If you start talking about technical jargon and trying to have them focus on the technical side of things instead of you focusing on the business, it's just going to get lost that way. It's just going to turn into a lost opportunity. So here's what clients really care about, at least in my experience. They absolutely care about who you are. Can they trust you? How well can they work with you? And ultimately, can you advance their business in some way? And then, obviously, they also care about the value that you can provide. And I'll even go further than that and say that clients require that your work advance their business in some way. If you're not able to help their business, you're not able to provide value, you're a net negative, and it's that simple, and they will not hire you. It doesn't matter how much they like you, they're not going to pay you just for the sake of paying you. You have to understand what their business is, and you have to understand how to deliver value to them on that front. So in terms of still going on clients and being able to sell your services, again, clients don't care about the technology, so at least in the forefront, don't focus on that stuff. Instead, focus on their business and understand the problems. And again, a client's pain point is really, you have to view a client's pain point as your opportunity. And if you can capitalize on that, that is probably one of the biggest drivers behind being a successful freelancer. So we'll look at maybe an example of an ineffective sales pitch in terms of selling your services and a more effective sales pitch. So the client starts out, geez, these spreadsheets are killing me. Assume some client is doing this manual spreadsheet work. And the consultant says, hey, well, you can automate that, with a cron job. Let's get that into the SQL database and use aggregate functions to do all that stuff. And that's a completely ineffective sales pitch. There's too much technical jargon going on in there for the client to really understand what you're saying. They're not gaining value from any of that. They're just scratching their head wondering what it is you're telling them. So we can look at a more effective sales pitch. So the client again says, geez, these spreadsheets are killing me. And a better consultant would say, hey, we can cut your time with those in half. So immediately they're just isolating on providing the client with value in that there's something that the consultant can do to ease the pain there. And the client says, hey, how can you do that? And the consultant may say, well, there's lots of ways to automate that stuff. But would you mind telling me about what these spreadsheets are and how often you have to deal with them? And so the last point there is very important. When we look at the differences, we can see that the more effective sales pitch, the client and consultant entered a discussion first and foremost about the client's business. They didn't start talking technical jargon right away. And there was also a dialogue starting on the client's pain point, the spreadsheets. What are they? How often do you encounter this pain, et cetera? And that last point is extremely important because that's where the value discovery starts. And when you're able to discover value, that you can deliver to a client, that provides happier clients. And that point in terms of that dialogue regarding the pain point, how often it occurs, another reason why that's important and that kind of dialogue is important is because you want to be able to quantify the value or the problem or the solution that you're solving or that you're providing to a client. So if it turns out that that client that pain was, say, a 10-minute pain once a month, there's not a whole lot of value you can deliver in that case. But if that client is dealing with a spreadsheets for 3 hours every single day, there's a huge savings that you can deliver to the client there. And you really want to take those situations and try to quantify them as much as you can so that you can come back to the client and say, look, here's what I can do, it will save you this amount of time, and here's the savings over the long run. And when you're able to really quantify the value in that form and show it to the client and convince them of it and sell them on it, that enables you to not, in some cases, lose an hourly rate or lose a fixed price and really price your solutions based on the value you're providing. And in some cases, in that way, you can earn far more money than you can pricing your services hourly or even daily or even with a fixed rate. So with that,
I had a question on that.
yeah, sure.
Did you price yourself high and get told no a few times, or did you price up low and eventually work your way up?
The latter, and I wish I hadn't done it that way. So when I first started freelancing, I won't talk about my current rate, but I'll talk about my past rates. I started out freelancing around 25 bucks an hour and doing part-time work on the side, etc. And we're talking, not that long out of college. I was young. I was just really wanting to get out there and gain some experience. Surprisingly, I'm surprised how well that worked for as little as I was charging. That obviously wouldn't work now. But the more experience I gained, I started increasing my rates more and more. I'm now at more than triple that rate, so it's working out a lot better now, obviously. But I think pricing is one of those things that freelancers almost always get wrong when they start. And there's also, in my case, I know I was actually a little worried to raise my rates, thinking I would lose clients, and I hear that a lot of other consultants feel that way. You have to really be confident about your rates and what you're worth. And a big way that you can kind of quantify your rate and increase your confidence in raising your rates is doing what I just said, is kind of helping quantify the value that you're providing. And if you're able to show a client that you're making them $10,000 and you'll charge them 3 or 4K, we're just talking theoretical here, the ultimate motivation behind a client hiring you is if they can hire you and make more money off of you than they're paying you, that's a happy client, and they will come back to you. So when it comes down to rates, a lot of it has to deal with realizing what you're worth and understanding the value that you're providing. So, yeah.
I have a question about the client conversations that you were mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess at sort of one extreme, you have maybe a client who maybe owns a small clothing store and they're unhappy that their business is going down and that's their pain point. They say, oh, well, we can fix that if we go online with a website.
Right.
And they read somewhere that some guy says, well, I can give you the equivalent functionality of Amazon.com in 3 weeks for $250 or something like that. And then you go and talk to them and they're obviously you need to tell them, look, that's just not even reasonable for me to solve your pain point. And on the other hand, you have maybe at the other extreme someone that really has thought about it and says, oh, I'm willing to pay a reasonable hourly rate to get this work done. Mm-hmm. But aren't most clients kind of in the middle? So you have to kind of manage those expectations a little bit. If they don't understand tech, they don't know how big of an investment it's going to be, or don't necessarily appreciate it. And how do you manage that? The kind of the sales function of trying to get them psyched up to sign up with you, along with kind of the tech function of sort of educating them as you're doing the work as what's realistic.
Yeah, right. So that's a good question, and I'll preface this by saying that I really think being able to sell your services effectively is absolutely critical. I'm not the best at it, but for when I'm dealing with non-technical clients and I'm having to maybe sell them on either my rate or why they should hire me and the value that I can provide to them. It's a tough thing to do in a short amount of time. So I don't necessarily have a great answer for your question, but I can tell you situations that I've been in like that, where it wound up being the case that the client actually wound up hiring me when I wasn't the cheapest, or I didn't actually have the lowest rate, and in some cases had the most expensive hourly rate. And it's been, the first part of that is really focusing on their business and getting to know the client. And more so than that is trying to really understand not just what they're doing, but how you can really deliver the value that they're looking for in terms of, for example, I'm swimming here a little bit, but for example, let's take the estimate process, for example, a pretty tedious process to do. I found that the estimate process is really a time for you to shine. It's a process that a lot of us hate, but it's really an opportunity to shine in that I use the estimate process to really engage the client and not only understand what it is that they need, but also help them maybe even refine their business a little bit. So I don't, maybe that's not a really great answer, but I don't necessarily.
Can I help you with that, man?
Yeah, sure.
You should never educate your clients. You should show up with a price sheet and say, these are my man hours, and then also know if they can tell you how many man hours does it take them to accomplish a certain task. If they do ask for education, you then present them with a price line to say, I can do education, but it will cost you this much. You give them like a per person or a group discount, right?
Yeah.
So education of a customer is really, that's really not why you're there. You're freelancing, you're doing a solution for them, so I wouldn't even bother with educating the customer.
So part of what I was going to get at too was filtering and interviewing clients. So if you have a client, for example, where you're finding that you're having to educate them in that manner, what do? Do you cut the tie and move on to another client, or?
You have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, one related question I have, what do you do with the clients who just come up with a spec and they already have, I guess, some estimate from some other freelancers, and they just ask, they give you a spec and they expect to get an estimate. Do you normally deal quite a bit like that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily shy away from giving an estimate. Is that kind of what you're asking about? If I get a client that has already feel that I guess they've already received 3 or 4 estimates from other freelancers, and they come to me and when they want an estimate, what I do, sometimes I'll give them the estimate. Other times I'll ask them. I may inquire about the budget. So there's part of what I was saying there, and also touches with this answer, is that you should really have a process for filtering clients and interviewing clients. The interview is always kind of seen as a client interviewing a freelancer or an employer interviewing an employee. The interview absolutely has to go both ways. So you can find yourself in tough situations like that if you're not screening your clients and you're not really getting a good idea of where they are with a project, where they are with the process of the project. In that case, there's cases where I know that potential clients have already fielded multiple estimates. In some of those cases, I just pass. What are they after? Are they trying to play a race to the bottom game? Who's the cheapest consultant? So in some of those cases, I'll just pass.
With some type of engineering, you can actually base the interviewing process and selection based on qualification, not based on cost. With the Texas moving with licensing software engineering, that could potentially end up into the same idea if the community will start requiring a selection based on qualification like other types of engineering. Maybe that's down the road. I don't know how everybody feels about the software engineering being a licensed commodity, but that's an option.
Yeah. In the back, Reacher.
I can make a comment on all of these things. I'm also a full-time freelancer. I absolutely love clients I have to educate, as long as they have absolutely no problem paying my rate.
That's right.
And the reason is, of course, if you can educate your clients and you can show them how to get more value, and you can teach them like how you're going to build their product or how to improve their business, they're going to love you for it because they're going to get value out of it. it. So, like, I have clients that I've helped, and they're completely loyal to me as a freelancer. Like, they're not gonna go anywhere else because I've helped them so much.
Right.
On the other hand, if I tell them my rate and they instantly have a problem with it, I don't wanna work with them. That's the end of the conversation right there.
That's right.
I don't lower my rate for anybody. So if they want a lower rate, tough
Right.
up, you know.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. And I find a big opportunity to do that is during the estimate process. Because you're really getting down to detail on what they need in their solution. And not only can you tweak the requirements or suggest technical solutions to their problems, but you can also talk to them about their business and maybe have them refine their business in a better way. Some problems are better solved in the business world and not always in the technical world, so, yeah.
So what questions do you ask clients when you're kind of in that phase of getting to know them?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And then also, kind of another question about estimates is, at what point do you start billing for your time in engineering? Like,
You got it.
yeah.
So 2 questions, right?
Yeah.
The first is, what do you ask your clients? I guess, how do you interview your clients? Probably the first thing I look for, I absolutely look at the team. The first thing I look at. And I try to gauge how passionate they are about what they're doing. Now granted, a lot of my clients are startups, and there's a reason why I like working with startups. And the fact is that most startups that I work with have a great deal of passion for what it is that they're trying to do, and they have these great big visions for delivering, or for building their company. So the first thing I look for is passion. Is the client passionate about what they do or not? If they're not passionate about what they do, to me that's a red flag, because if they see a project or some sort of solution they need as just a necessary evil, there tends to be some friction in working with those types of clients. They're also the type of clients that are just trying to do just enough, and they're trying to get by with just enough, having to pay only so much in their solution. So I absolutely look at passion and try to gauge the client's interest in what it is that they're doing. Another question I ask is what their experience is like in doing projects that they're trying to do, technical projects, for example, or what's their experience like working with other developers, or what kind of experience do they bring to the table being involved in those in projects like the one that they're asking about. First-time clients that aren't technical, that have never managed or overseen a technical project, can be a little tough to work with, because you're going to find yourself maybe having to teach them a lot, which may not be a bad thing, as we spoke about earlier. But they're not always, those types of projects aren't always the smooth sailing ones. So for the most part, I look at passion, I look at what their experience is with those types of projects. And I also ask about budget, obviously. I think you need to be able to filter out very early on whether a client, the type of solution a client is looking for is going to fit their budget. For example, I had 2 initial consultations with a client of mine, and after that second consultation, I was thinking, well, let's say this solution is going to be 40 to 50K worth of work. If they tell me their budget is 5K, it's done. It's not going to work. It's not going to happen. How do you tell a client that, hey, you're here at 5K, we're here at 50, I'm thinking 50K, we're miles apart, not inches. There's only so much that you can do to try to reconcile differences, and if you have a really huge difference like that, it's going to be really tough to sell that client. So passion, experience with the projects that they're inquiring about, and also the budget. And your second question was,
When do you, like...
when you start charging for time?
Yeah, when do you stop estimating? And
Yeah, so I'll tell you how I do it, and maybe others disagree or agree. For new clients, I inform them before I start charging time, but there's a pretty good amount of time that I don't charge for. And the goal being that I want to be able to develop a relationship and get them initial consultations to help build the trust and get the relationship flowing, that kind of thing. So for them, I'll give a certain amount of hours to invest in that kind of thing. But there is certainly a point where I eventually nudge them and say, hey, we've gotten so far along, we've invested this much time. I'm gonna turn the clock on, and from here on out, this is gonna be billed, this time is gonna be billable. I'm certainly lenient with that for a new client in the first engagement, but repeat clients know that from the next project on, I absolutely do bill for estimates, because clients gain value from estimates, so it's something that you should absolutely bill for. But we had a conclusion here.
Whoever was commenting about like, what do you do if someone comes to you with a spec already and estimating it? I don't freelance much anymore, but when I was, I'll never lower my rate, but I will raise it. So like if someone comes to me with a spec and they're like, here's 7 bids for this, what's your bid for it? And it's super detailed and it's written by, a senior product manager. I can either decide, hey, this is super easy, I know exactly what to do, I can just check off the boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can either decide like, yes, great, I want to do this, I'll bid it, or no, like, that's not the kind of work I want to do, and you can cut them loose really quickly because you know exactly what they want. However, the people I actually prefer, and this is all about just knowing what your level is like, if someone comes to me with like a half page of spec for what I think is probably a $50,000 project,
Yeah.
my rate goes up, because you're not just asking for coding, you're asking for software engineering and software architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's way more expensive than somebody implementing, like you said, data transformations on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And so like the less defined it is, I will actually charge more for that, because you're asking me to add a lot more value to the equation than just implementing something for you.
Kate, I think Keith was first.
So when I ran into scenarios like that, I always split the contract into 2 pieces. One was building the specification, and there was always an exit clause at that point.
Mhm.
Where if I've been working with this person for a couple weeks, maybe a month or so, working out the spec, and I realize this guy's a pain in the ass,
Yeah.
at the end of it, he's got a fully functional spec, and I can walk away. So that's a really nice place to get it. And then, since a lot of the value is right there, you still actually benefit from that, and they benefit from it too.
Agreed.
So, obviously the best way to get a client is when they come to you, right? So
Mhm.
therefore you have to do some sort of advertising or get the word out about what you do. What do you do on that front?
In terms of advertising, that's something honestly I'm not very good at. It's absolutely critical for a lot of folks, especially early on. But I think I caught an easy boat in that in year 1, I already had so much work from repeat clients and from past previous employers that allowed me to float for a really, really long time. And from that existing network, from previous employers, past clients, my network kind of grew from there. I was starting to get referrals immediately already in year 1, and that's certainly grown, like what I showed in that chart, that's certainly grown as the years have gone on. I don't have a lot of experience advertising. What I do is try to stay active in online forums and write a blog, etc., just to allow potential clients or other folks in the freelancing community to kind of get to know a little bit about who I am. And again, some of those blog posts and some of that forum activity has generated leads and turned into paying gigs. But in terms of formal advertising and doing targeted advertising or even paid advertising, that's something I don't have a whole lot of experience with, but it is one of my goals for 2013.
So do you use stuff like LinkedIn, or you have a website?
I do have a LinkedIn account, and I guess we're done here. And I certainly do have a website, so solutionfactor.net. And again, Freelance Factor is the online community that I run, and you're certainly welcome to join there. TimePanel.net's logo is not loading, but TimePanel is the time tracking invoicing solution my company created. So yeah, there's up there to the side. Yeah.
When it comes to getting the word out and advertising, I found 2 sources that work really good for me, and I welcome any feedback on this. So, one of the first things I do is I get involved in the developer community, meetups, get to know who else is in the community, and the other one is freely available. That's social media. I'm heavily promoting myself on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google Plus.
Yeah, I know a handful of consultants that have talked to me probably in the past week or so that are starting initiatives or do have initiatives going in social media via Facebook or Twitter or whatnot. And I'll give you a confession, I'm an extreme introvert. And so I don't engage in social media a whole lot. I'm not on Twitter. In fact, being here is a little bit of a challenge. So social media and again, advertising and getting out networking, even though it's important, that's certainly not my strong suit. And that's a mistake on my part. Try not to make it. Here.
What about the finances of things as far as taxes go? Are there any recurring costs of having a company? What do you use your accountant for? All that stuff.
Yeah, right. So there were a few slides, a handful of slides actually that I removed just to try to keep this talk was actually designed to go an hour straight, and so I cut out some of the topics, and that was one of them. So in terms of taxes, yeah, so I have a great accountant. I just lean on him for everything tax related. But when I first started, you know, when I thought about being a sole proprietor or doing a DBA or single member LLC, et cetera, I kind of looked at the tax differences. And it turns out that sole proprietors and single member LLCs, those are taxed the same. So both of those go Schedule C on your personal income tax, which means your tax return, which means one tax return. You don't have to file multiple tax returns for one for your business and one for your personal use. But when you start extending into the realm of hiring employees, honestly, I'm not exactly sure how that changes. If someone can speak to that, maybe they can. But I hire contractors all the time, and so that that's what I do for other resources. And as far as taxing, I'm still just on Schedule C on my personal tax return.
I was kind of hoping we get close to this topic because I just moved to Austin and I need a business tax accountant. Right now I'm a sole proprietor, but I'm soon going to be organizing into a single person LLC.
Yeah.
So anyone can recommend a good tax accountant, I appreciate it.
So I mean, if you're kind of going at it yourself, if you want to form it, so as Marco just stated, you can either be a single shareholder LLC or a DBA. It's basically the same thing, tax implications until you start making a lot of money. The thing that an LLC brings to the table is it brings you some liability protection, which I've had a hard time wrapping my head around where I would be liable for a client, but hey, that's something. To get an LLC is $300. You just go down to downtown and fill out a form. It's real easy, so I don't really see any reason not to, honestly. So I mean, as long as as far as just your services, you're not selling any products, there's not going to be any, you don't have to worry about sales tax. If you start selling any kind of products or some services such as hosting, then you are potentially liable for sales tax, and you have to get kind of go through the state comptroller, get a sales tax ID and all that, and start filing quarterly sales tax interest. But other than that, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Just set aside a third of all your income that you're going to be paying out to Uncle Sam.
And I'll add a little bit to that in regard to kind of the income bit and the LLC part. Yeah, so LLCs offer a protection of your personal assets in the case of some sort of legal problem. One slide that I left out of here, but is an important topic, is have separate bank accounts for your business operation and your personal use. So if anyone ever comes after your business and you're an LLC and you have that personal protection, it's going to make that whole thing go over a lot smoother if you can say, here's my business account, these are my business funds, and here's my personal bank account, et cetera. So if there's separation there, that's always going to be an easier thing to deal with. So.
And you just keep everything in the overseas account, right?
It's not very cost effective to get out for $100,000.
Way in the back, Shane.
Not that I run those numbers.
I can make some additional comments also to finding clients. Is that I find all my clients through networking. I do social media networking. I do events like this.
Yeah.
I get clients through word of mouth, referrals, and everything. It's a little tough when you start because you may not have a network of people to go to see if it needs to work. But I think social media is a great way to meet people too. Is if you put in your social media profiles, PHP freelancer or web developer or something like that. Something that can actually bring people looking for somebody to you, and just getting out and just talking to people.
Yeah.
Which can be tough if you're an introvert. But,
yeah. So I was going to add a little bit to that.
Break through it and push on.
And yeah, I think that's ultimately why I'm not good at getting out there and networking as I am. And I'll reinforce again, I think I lucked out in having very reliable, really great sources of work when I first made the jump in year one. And I also want to ask you, you may or may not want to reveal, but when you take on a project or contract, how long is that typically for? Are we talking 2-week projects, 6 months, multi-year?
I have one project right now that's been going on for a year and a half. I have one that I actually started just like you.
Yeah.
My first client was my previous company that I worked for. They made up most of my income my first year as well.
Yeah.
They're still my client, so I've had them for a couple of years.
Right.
Yeah, I have some projects that have been, I like long-term projects. But,
Right, yeah, me
you know,
too.
you get that steady long-term clients, it's much easier.
And that, yeah, and that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at now. And again, when I first started, the contracts, like I said, I had 6 or 12 months of work already lined up, and we're not talking about 10 or 15, 20 projects. We're talking maybe 2 or 3 big contracts for that whole time. So whenever I have that kind of runway focused on just 2 or 3 projects, it makes it mitigates the drawbacks of not getting out there and marketing and networking yourself as much as you should. So, yeah, good point. Yeah,
Another
Shane?
potential way, another potential way is just get Craigslist. And I don't necessarily mean local Craigslist. I
Yeah.
mean, go to like San Francisco Craigslist where
Bay
there's all
Area,
this tech
yep.
stuff going on. And you'll get, there's a lot of garbage, but you can kind of dig through it and you can find some stuff. I got one client doing that.
Yeah.
But you can find some stuff out there.
Yeah, some of my early work was on Craigslist, and again, you know, my rates were low when I first started and gradually increased. And I won't go as far as saying Craigslist is an ideal place to find work, because you find people on there just trying to get low budget stuff done. But it has worked for some people, so that's at the very minimum, it's another option. Yeah, Shane?
So, for everyone here, I'm not actually a PHP developer, I'm a sysadmin, and I've brought Marco in on a project in the past. And number one of the first things that, I found Marco through Craigslist.
Are you gonna hype me up?
Hey, what I found is a lot of employers don't know where they're looking for people, particularly if they're not already a high-tech, company. So Craigslist is kind of the common denominator, and it works really well. So I found Marco through there, and I presented him to my clients. One of the nice things that was able to sell Marco was the fact that he had the website out there that they could go look at. It's not really, it doesn't matter how technical it is, doesn't matter how much information's out there. But if it's there, if it's current, and it doesn't look like it came from 1993, that really sold my clients on hiring Marco for that solution. That's what I want to add there is,
Yeah, I think
you've got to have a really good presence out there on the net.
Yeah, I think an online presence is important, especially a website. I think my opinion, I'll change the subject just only briefly. I have this opinion of business cards. I have some here, and I think they're important. But I think in some ways they're being minimized, if not obsolete. I think online websites, I think writing ebooks, that kind of thing, those are really becoming the modern day business card. Because clients can go and look at these things and learn a lot more about you. And business cards still play a role. I won't go as far as saying they're obsolete. But I find more and more of my clients want to go to my website, or they want to read my blog, or they want to know what other initiatives I have going on. I have one client that loved the fact that I have a site like Freelance Factory going, another that liked the fact that I've developed my own products, that kind of thing. So I think certainly an online presence and also taking on other initiatives online that other people can go and see, I think that's an incredible way to market yourself.
Yeah, I'll add the number one, I get all the email from Meetup, and the number one thing that people email me and ask for is freelancers. They don't know where to find them. If they're not a tech company, they have no idea. I probably get, not as much anymore, but for a while there I was getting one every other day, like, hey, I'm starting up this business and I'm looking. Now, unfortunately, most of them are like, I'm looking for a freelancer to do the work for equity, and I'm like, yeah, probably not. But, there's a lot of demand, especially in Austin. The demand is out there, and I don't have a good answer for how to like match the people up with it. I know there's plenty of websites that do that, but there is demand for the work to be done.
That's what the subgroup's for.
Yeah.
You can just forward.
I thought it was good to hear.
That's the other part of it.
Yeah, I will say that in a lot of cases, the amount of work out there isn't the problem. The real problem is finding really great clients, and focusing on work that you're really passionate about. So, yeah.
So I was going to say earlier, that sort of speaks to that. It also speaks to billing. I do just a little bit of freelance work. I have a full-time job. But I don't keep a set rate for doing it. Every job I do is based on what it's going to be worth to me to take on that job. So if it's a client I like, if it's a technology I like, that's less expensive than if it's a technology I don't like, or a client that looks like it's going to be kind of iffy. And there's a lot of jobs. I'll very, very rarely say no to a job, but I will give an estimate or an hourly rate that is high enough that they will say, right? It'll be sort of high ball. I will work for you for $200 an hour.
I'll offer a friendly disagreement there, only in that, having dealt with some problematic clients when I first started, they couldn't pay me enough to work for them.
Yeah, the last freelancing gig I did, when I swore it off, I came up with a ridiculous number like that, and they were like, okay.
Yeah, it'll backfire.
They just outsourced it to somebody else.
Did they pay?
What's that?
Did they pay it?
No, I said I declined it. There is a number where I should have invented something ridiculously high because I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So I will say one thing as far as like finding new work. So I mean, yes, finding new work at the onset it can be problematic, and it's like Craigslist or Guru or Odesk, and unfortunately you're gonna on some of those sites you're gonna be competing with the international markets, which means it's gonna be tough, especially if people are trying to look to lowball. I will say if you find yourself you've been trying to do this for a while and you're constantly trying to find new clients, you might want to reevaluate something you're doing because you're finding good clients. I mean, sure, the first 4 to 6 months or whatever, you're going to have a tough time finding clients. But if you have shown yourself to be of value to that client, either they're going to get you to do more work or they're going to get you referrals. And it's almost like a waterfall. I mean, I know for me and Marco as well, sure, that first 6 months or a year might have been tough to find clients. But I mean, at that point, I haven't done any advertising in probably 3 or 4 years, and I'm turning down work all the time. I mean, it's just, you get referrals and clients that are coming back to you constantly if you're doing everything right. And so if you find yourself in that position where you're continuously trying to find work, you might want to do some self-reflection and find out if there's something that maybe you're not, providing the full service to your clients that you need to.
So in the beginning, you mentioned incorporating and hiring an accountant are both great ideas. I also recommend hiring a lawyer to create the standard contract verbiage and make it also a two-way NDA. Because if you have to sign a big company's contract, they're protecting them and not you. Also, if you have any phone calls or any in-person meetings, immediately after, send an email to recap it, just to have a record and make sure you're on the same page.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'll even add a little bit to that in that one slide I left out of here is like tools that you can use, for time tracking and invoicing, but also for things like that, like project management, and to kind of facilitate the collaboration and communication. I think that's really important because especially in big projects, 100 different things get said in meetings, and you have 100 different meetings throughout the course of the project. Things are going to get missed. So just being real thorough about the communication, following up on it, and having some sort of paper trail that you can go back and point to things and figure out what decision was made and when. That's absolutely gold. On the lawyer part of it, another mistake. I don't have a learned lawyer. I don't have an attorney. I do have resources for that kind of thing, and I actually had to pull one in for a debate that I got into with a client. But I don't have a regular attorney that I go to on a regular basis.
Yeah, if I can, what you said is right on the ball, because if you work on a client's system, everything you do and everything that they paid you for is theirs. If you come up with some brilliant idea, it's theirs, and you can't use it anywhere else. If they find out, they can actually sue you. So that's an excellent idea to really get a lawyer ahead and maybe have a product, that is yours that you bring to the table rather than making it at the table.
Well, there has to be a contract there, right? In some sort,
Right.
is what you're referring to?
Well, I've had some eureka moments where I came up with this brilliant idea, but I did it on the client's stuff, and then I couldn't use it again, and it really pissed me off, So it's a learning lesson.
To get started on the legal side, I started with the site Nolo, NOLO.com.
Right.
And they gave me a package of contracts that are like, oh, what do you care about, A or B? And you could just sort of start with their template. You deleted the stuff you didn't want. And that was like $70, $80. And once I had cash flow going, I went to an attorney and said, here's what I'm starting with. And she went through and she ripped it apart and added a few things and removed some other things. So you can get started with it for relatively cheap. And it's just like insurance, where you think it's expensive going in, but you don't know how expensive it can be if you don't have it. I mean,
What was the website?
Yeah, what was the
Nolo,
site?
NOLO.com.
Nolo?
Nolo. There's a ton of others, like
Yeah, there
there's
is.
a bunch of others.
Oh, sorry.
I'd say don't write your own contract though. That's not what you're good at. You're good at writing code, not law. Please.
I want to add to that, but I want to get to his question.
So I just wanted to say, along the lines of contracts, generally it's not cost effective, especially when you're just getting started, to have an attorney write a contract from scratch for you. But really what I recommend for a lot of clients, and a lot of different businesses, is instead of having an attorney build it for you, go and find some other company, a big company, that's already paid their attorneys to build a contract. Use that as a starting point when you go and talk to your attorney and say, here's the contract that fits what I'm looking for. Can you help me tweak it so that it's ideal for what I'm looking for? So you're not paying the hours to build something completely from scratch, and you have a reasonable starting point.
Yeah. Back a little bit to what Keith said in regard to we're good coders, we're not legal people, get a lawyer for that. One general premise in that regard is that you should absolutely try to partner with people that can cover the skill sets that you're not very good at. Especially developers should partner with graphic designers especially. If you're not good at databases, make sure you have someone that is a strong SQL or DBA, sysadmin, that kind of thing. Again, because I'm introverted, I try to do a lot of things on my own. It hasn't been until maybe the past couple of years that I'm really finding myself in positions where I have to partner with other people and I have to start delegating these tasks out. And I used to do that a lot in my full-time position, but for some reason that just went cold when I was a freelancer. And as I grow and I'm taking on bigger clients and bigger engagements that require more resources, it's absolutely critical that I'm able to push work out to designers or other developers or even DBAs or whatnot. So on that point, I think it's very important to know your limits and be able to partner with other freelancers. Sounds like that's it. Thanks, guys.